Thanks a lot, Stembisa, for joining us on Newsnight this evening.
Thank you for having me.
It's this question around tourism, especially when it comes to the way in which South Africans travel the continent. Must say it's been improving over the years, but still, there's still some need for South Africans to start experiencing Africa and to be part of a continent.
Thank you for having me, Faith. Right now, celebrating Africa Day is so significant for us. For us, for tourism, we have, at South African Tourism, we have started a journey of looking at showcasing our tourism products and tourism offering from a continent point of view rather than South Africa. Earlier this year in February, we staged one of our platforms called Meetings Africa, which represents the business events industry, where we had about 17 the rest of the African countries exhibiting. Now in May, beginning of May, we staged one of the biggest travel trade show in the continent called Africa Travels in Durban.
That was in KwaZulu-Natal.
That was held in Durban. Yeah. And in that platform, 19 African countries showcased that tourism product. And I think we're doing this because we want to say to the rest of the world, Africa is ready for business, and we're ready to actually share our stories. We want to actually tell our own African stories, than people continuing to tell our stories. So for people, to your question, people traveling in the continent, particularly South Africans, we want to actually start by them traveling South Africa. We know that we have an issue around domestic travel in our country.
Why do we still have an issue around domestic travel? Is it because South Africans, Mpumalanga is just 3 hours away, so there's this, I'll go next month. It's already there, not an appreciation for having something that is right in your backyard?
Faith, there are a couple of issues that is facing us as a country when it comes to the issues of domestic tourism. The first thing is, obviously, we know that there's unemployment in our country, so the economic situation actually is one of the big barriers. But the second thing is that majority of South Africans just don't have the culture of travel. We have not been able to crack communicating the value of travel to fellow South Africans, and we're trying that through our Short Left campaign to try and show accessibility of travel in South Africa. But also to your question, we're trying to get Africans to travel the continent. So South Africans to travel into the continent, and the people in the continent to travel to South Africa. Right now, 70% of our arrivals in South Africa comes from the continent. Contrary to popular belief, people think that the tourism economy comes from international or Europe, the US of the world. But 30% of our revenue in terms of tourism is from the continent. And
I wish we could reverse those roles and say how many South Africans are actually traveling the continent and actually going to East Africa or West Africa and getting to understand that we are part of a whole and not necessarily having the first. If we have the knowledge of traveling or the mindset of traveling, we automatically think, hey, let's go to America, or here, let's go to Europe. But actually see the continent as a wonderful destination of actually not only enhancing our culture, but also enhancing our knowledge in terms of the continent itself.
You are right. We're definitely not losing hope. And I think the collaboration that we've started with the rest of the continent, or as a continent, when it comes to tourism issues, would afford us that opportunity to start showcasing what Africa has to offer. I always say that, in fact, the entire world is looking at the continent for long-lasting, travel memories. Gone are the days where people are just traveling for the sake of traveling. People want, to travel to change their mindset. People want to travel to experience culture. People want to travel to experience, true stories and authentic stories. And I think the continent has the opportunity to actually showcase that to the world.
But doesn't the continent also have an opportunity to stop with the visas? It does not make sense. Why is it that certain European countries, for example, will have free access into the continent just by having a specific type of visa? You get more access as opposed to Africans having access to more countries as well. So there's still that issue around why is it that to travel around the continent we still have to have impositions of visas? Why is it that it still must be an expensive exercise? Going to Angola, for example, needs you to apply first to the embassy, get an invitation. There's a whole, a process that needs to go into just to acquire that visa. And perhaps that could be even the reason why many South Africans feel as though, it's a tedious process when really we should be looking at each other as brothers and sisters of the continent and do away with this issue of visas.
Fortunately, when the president attended Africa's Travel Index this year, which he gave, during his speech, the whole commitment to what the AU has started around, free travel in the continent, and actually reaffirming his commitment and the government's commitment to actually work towards, easing those regulatory barriers. And you are right. If you look at a lot of countries who have ease of access when it comes to visa issues, that's where you see a lot of tourism numbers.
Absolutely.
I mean, for us as well, when the government introduced a visa waiver for Angola, we've seen a 39% increase into South Africa from Angola. So we know that there are some small wins. We need to acknowledge that. But I am comfortable that the government has now put this on the radar. It's on the radar of government, and they're putting together, measures in place to ensure that issues around visa regulations are eased to ensure
Let's
growth in tourism.
Let's speak now about the continent, because we are talking about continental tourism here.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we still see that some African countries would rather have a European country, whether it's Berlin, whether it's I always say even the former colonized countries, whether it's Portugal, etc., they have freer access into the continent as opposed to countries within the continent themselves? Why is it there's still that existence? Why is it that we've got certain countries that will still appreciate a fellow African, going through the process of acquiring a visa instead of a European country going through the similar? Is it a mindset thing? Do we suffer from a mindset?
I think you are right. It's a mindset issue. But for me, as we celebrate Africa Day, it's important for us because it actually gives us an opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to the continent. Gone are the days where we think development comes from elsewhere but the continent. And I think if you have listened to the inauguration speech yesterday, the president summed it very well to say, the fact that you had heads of states from the rest of the continent actually shows you that there is that commitment to actually work together, to be united as a continent, to actually take charge of our own development. I think in his speech he actually mentioned the issue of free trade within the continent, because that would make us comfortable as a continent that development is here. We don't have to look elsewhere, and we've got to work together for that. And it is, for tourism as well, issues around policy, legislation, and I think as a continent, if we can work together in that space as well to ensure that we ease these regulatory barriers, we'll go a long way in terms of actually seeing the opportunity that tourism has.
Well, Stembisa, referring to the president around policy, it almost appears as though he's reinforcing the African agenda, which is a good thing because it sounded like a rebirth of the African Renaissance, really. If you're looking at how you need to be proud of your Africanism and be proud of the fact that you are from this continent and this continent has got a lot to offer. Is it also around the issue of we just do not know what this continent has to offer in terms of waterfalls, in terms of the natural landscapes, in terms of just even the quality of service and the quality of hotels, because people still, and the quality of infrastructure that we've got? There's still maybe almost a silo operating, isolated mindset when it comes to the realities of the continent that we are just not embracing simply because maybe we're just watching way too much MTV.
I think, Faith, for me, it's not a question of us not knowing what we have. It's us not able to actually narrate our stories better. I think we just need to brush up our storytelling and to ensure that we narrate what it is that we want the rest of the world to see us. I mean, a lot of unfortunately, perceptions around the continent in the rest of the world still is Africa, the dark continent. Africa is not safe. Africa doesn't have the relevant products, and yet our culture is one of the critical offering when it comes to issues of tourism. Our people is, we always say South Africa, for example, the people are at the core of our brand because they are warm, they are welcoming. So we've got to showcase what we have, as a continent, and that comes in how we narrate. And it is partnership with media as well, because I think media plays an important role in ensuring that the story about the continent goes out there. And it's not just stories, but positive stories.
Well, it's not just about selling newspapers for the sake of shock factor, right? But rather about selling the truth also and be able to be objective on it. Challenge received, challenge acknowledged. It's going to leave our conversation there this afternoon. But thanks a lot for joining us and really shedding some light in terms of the importance of tourism, not only from a domestic front, but really on the continent, that we need to start, as you said, narrating those stories so that our stories stories can be better told. Thanks a lot for joining us there as speaking to Ustembiso from South African Tourism. She is indeed the acting CEO of SS Tourism, Ustembiso Dlamini, giving us insight on that.